Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for tuning in and being here. I am thrilled to have seen so many of you in person at recent events that we've conducted. Soy Connects in San Diego, where we had over 600 international participants, and this week, the U.S. Ag Cooperators Conference in Lima, Peru. Most of you know me, but for those that I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name is Jim Sutter, and I'm the CEO of the U.S. Soybean Export Council. And I'm really pleased to exchange some views with you this evening and to have such great panelists and participants here tonight to talk to us about the recent report that came out. Today, as you all know, USDA released their World Agriculture Supply and Demand Estimate Report, or WASDE, and it contained a few surprises, which many of you, I'm sure, or most of you, have already noticed. Despite delayed planning due to rains and wet conditions, farmers and USDA's analysts forecast robust soybean yields, even though maybe a little robust than earlier thought. But only a couple of months' time will tell us exactly what will be harvested. But please know that our farmers are working hard to make sure they deliver a high-quality product that's produced sustainably, and then we have a reliable delivery system to make sure it gets to buyers of U.S. soy all around the world. In just a moment, our Vice President of Market Intelligence, Mac Marshall, will get into the latest numbers. But first, a couple comments I want to make. Today, the 3 C's of COVID, climate, and conflict continue to generate much uncertainty, which spills over into the businesses of everyone online at this moment. Hang in there and keep navigating the storm. As we do hang in there, the question we must ask ourselves is, are we hoping it will all pass quickly? Is this just a transitory moment? Or are we as leaders surveying the horizon and accurately perceiving today's reality to be able to effectively predict tomorrow? I encourage you to look carefully and critically at the global environment, what consumers in your market are expecting of you and your company. In this time of volatility and uncertainty, we're focused on the positive impact that we can have. U.S. soy farmers are focused on harvesting a nutritious and sustainable U.S. crop, so families around the world can reliably access nutritious, safe, and affordable food every day. And we're your partners as that gets delivered by many of you in far corners all around the world. Regardless of where you are in the food and feed value chain, I encourage you to consider sustainable U.S. soy as a reliable solution to your needs. Whether you're feeding chickens, some other animal, people, or fish, including U.S. soy in feed or food delivers an optimal nutritional bundle, improved digestibility, and it also advances sustainability. And more than ever, consumers are interested in knowing how their actions affect the climate situation around the world. Keep that in mind. We like to think of our industry from farm through the whole supply chain as being a key solution to the world's climate and hunger issues. We want to give customers and consumers confidence that a better world is possible, and USEC and US Soy are committed to delivering sustainable and reliable solutions. Now, let me tell you about today's program. It's our pleasure to host guest analyst, Head of Market Insights for RJ O'Brien, Mr. Randy Middlestadt. He will provide insight and perspective around the U.S. soy crop, the world supply and demand, and global trends to account for. It's great to have Randy with us again. Then we're going to sit down with 3 U.S. soy farmers, Stan Bourne, who farms in Illinois, Don Shire, who farms in South Dakota, and Brian Kemp, who farms in Iowa. And they'll share a little about their farms, provide an overview of their growing season, crop conditions, what they anticipate for harvest, as well as their marketing plans. After that, we'll open it up for questions with our analysts, Mac and Randy. I encourage you to start sending your questions in as you think of them during the presentations. We want to get as many of those answered as possible, so the sooner you get them into us, that will help. But first, we're going to hear from our colleague, Mac Marshall, who will kick us off with a brief overview of today's USDA report. Thank you for being here. I look forward to your insights. And now over to you, Mac.
Thank you very much, Jim, and let's get right into it. Now, September is the month where we get a lot smarter about the size of the U.S. soybean crop, And with heat stress across much of the US in August, we now get an assessment of how much that may have impacted soybean production. Moving to the key takeaways from Monday's report. USDA took down planted area by 570,000 acres, bringing planted area to 87.455 million acres, or about 35.4 million hectares. 1 month after taking projected yields up to 51.9 bushels per acre, USDA has now cut its yield estimate to 50.5 bushels per acre. With the cuts to both acreage and yield, USDA now projects the 2022 soybean crop in the US to be 4.378 billion bushels. Now, while that's no longer a potential record at this moment, this would still be the fourth largest crop on record, slightly trailing the 2021, 2017, and 2018 crops. Now, USDA balanced the drop in production with a combination of cuts to both exports and crush. Crush was revised down slightly by 20 million bushels, while the export forecast was reduced by 70 million bushels, or about 1.9 million tons. USDA also issued a slight cut to the export volume for the recently completed 21-22 marketing year. Now, putting the cuts to production and reconciling them with the cuts to crush and exports, projected carryout for the 22-23 marketing year is now 200 million bushels, or 5.4 million metric tons, a 45 million bushel or 1.3 million metric ton cut from the prior estimate, and also a multi-year low. USDA maintained its price forecast for beans, meal, and oil for the new marketing year. Now, with that reduction in crush, USDA also issued slight cuts to its production forecast for meal and oil. USDA balanced those production cuts through a drop in the biofuels use of soybean oil and cuts to soybean meal exports, though both categories are still showing annual projected growth. Looking outside the US, the production cuts contributed to a drop in global inventories from 101.4 million metric tons to 98.92 million metric tons. Lastly, Chinese imports of whole soybeans were cut by 1 million tons. Here's a look at what the market was expecting in Monday's report. The trade focused on US production, and as you can see in these charts, the prevailing yields and production both fell below the range of pre-release market expectations. Cuts, ending stocks were also revised down. The projected 22-23 carryout of 200 million bushels came in below market expectations and is reflective of overall supply tightness. On a global level, inventories were toward the lower end of expectations given a smaller US crop. Given the cuts to both area and yields, I wanted to touch briefly on the state level changes. Relative to August, total area was taken down by 570,000 planted acres, with the largest reductions occurring in Illinois, Iowa, and South Dakota. Incidentally, these are the three states represented by our upcoming farmer panel. As for yields, even with cuts, 4 states are still on pace to set yield records, but you can also see in the map the impact that dryness has had across the Central Plains. Lastly, it's been a couple months since I've showed the visual balance sheets for the US, but I wanted to revisit them as we get close to harvest. The chart on the left shows the projected balance sheet as of last month, while the one on the right incorporates the updates from USDA on Monday. As you can see in red, the smaller crop on the production side translates into lower crush, lower meal exports, lower whole bean exports, and ending stocks. Though it still bears mention that our meal exports are projected to increase year on year, and the prevailing whole soybean export figure of nearly 57 million tons would still be among our top 5 campaigns. Now we look to physical harvest in the coming weeks. This concludes my brief opening comments on Monday's report. Let's jump to the meat of the discussion. It is now my pleasure to welcome Randy Middlestat, Head of Market Insights at R.J. O'Brien, back to the program.
Thanks, Mac. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here once again and talk about today's reports, which were pretty interesting.
Hey, absolutely, and thanks for joining. I always enjoy our discussions both offline and on the program. Let me jump ahead to what was really intriguing to me. I didn't expect to see a change in area, either planted or harvested, in this September report. Help me reconcile what's going on here. I didn't expect to see a drop there.
Yeah, typically the USDA does not do the acreage review until the October set of numbers. They felt they had enough information with the FSA program acreage released several weeks ago as well as other farmer input, that they could go ahead and make those, make that revisit of acreage levels here for this month's report. Quite frankly, the reduction was a little surprising. There's no doubt about it. The relationship between the FSA program acreage data and NASS US-wide acreage numbers, not always the best, but it's usually good enough that you do get some sort of an indication, at least in the direction of the USDA's acreage revision. And quite frankly, we thought there was a possibility of a slight uptick, if anything, in the soybean acreage numbers from what had previously been estimated. So yeah, that was clearly a surprise. There's no doubt.
Well, it's been an interesting year on the area side. If you recall, when we were doing this at the end of March, we were looking at potentially 91 million planted acres. And, due to input costs and obviously changing price levels, a very wet spring, when USDA finally came out with their acreage figures at the end of June, we saw a pretty substantial reduction there, taking it down to 88 and change. And now we've got that revised down again slightly. So definitely an interesting narrative unfolding over the balance of this growing season. But of course, I think the bigger narrative is what's been unfolding on the weather side. We got off to a slow start in planting because of wet weather. And of course, we had the heat pressure throughout much of the summer. How are you interpreting this drop in yields, particularly a month after USDA actually took the yields up?
Yeah, I think we need to keep in mind the methodology USDA has when they're estimating the crop. The August number still, for lack of a better word, it's still based largely on subjectivity. They're looking at farmer survey input data, they're looking at satellite data, but they're not in the fields yet, for the August report. So, there's been a lot of optimism given the yield performance the last 2 years, that despite the somewhat difficult growing conditions this year, that we may be able to still achieve year ago yield type numbers, even with those difficulties. But again, for the September report, it's the first time they're in the fields. They're actually doing, field surveys. And that's when we really start to see what's there and what's not there. When we look at the 50.5 bushel an acre average yield today, the big number there is the USDA's assessment of pod counts. So they go in the fields, they actually do the pod count assessment, and in the 11 objective yield survey states, pod counts were down nearly 7% from a year ago. They were the lowest since 2019. So when we look at the weekly crop condition ratings and we see these numbers that are comparable to year ago levels, and we want to believe before we get in the fields, well, similar crop conditions mean similar yields to a year ago. It really does come down heavily to the pod count numbers. And those were, like I said, the lowest since 2019 and second lowest of at least the last 7 or 8 years. So that's where the big shocker came from. Looking forward, there's a couple of things that we really do need to keep in mind. Historically, pod counts from the September report to final numbers do increase. We do see that late season increase in pod count numbers, and on average over the last 6 years, that increase from September to the final number is about 5%. It's a pretty hefty number. So when we see USDA's yield estimates and good crop condition years move higher, that's one of the main reasons why, because we do see that escalation in pod count numbers. The one thing that is troubling or concerning to us this year is when we look at the last time that we had historically low pod counts was 2019. In 2019, that increase from September to final was only 1.5% versus the 5 to 6% average that we would see in a quote unquote normal year of conditions. So, we're kind of going back and forth here, where we look at historically low pod counts, the potential for an improvement moving forward. But the last time we were at these levels, we really didn't see that improvement. So we really need to see, in my opinion, what that October number is to see, are we going to be adding bushels or subtracting bushels in the overall scheme of things relative to today's estimate.
So there are a couple of things I want to draw out from there. One, looking at that analog year for pod counts and reduction there in terms of 2019. 2019 was a very, very difficult year for farming corn and beans both in the U.S. We had a very wet spring. a lot of delayed acreage. A lot of corn and beans did not get planted in both the Corn Belt and in the Dakotas that year. Fortunately, that wasn't the case this season, but certainly adverse conditions early on. Two, you'd mentioned the comparison to year over year crop conditions. Just, to refresh everyone, last year we did set record crop size in the U.S. So as long as we're tracking and within range there, and I think conditions report that came out earlier today, we're at 56% good to excellent. I want to say this time last year it's 57%, so somewhat comparable there. And then two other points. One, we can never take a harvest for granted. Like last month when we were looking at yields of nearly 52 bushels an acre, everything seemed great, but you can still have these revisions. You still have heat stress late in the season. You can't take planting for granted. And I guess I kind of want to reconcile that with as well. As you consider the rate of genetic gain in the U.S., we're continually advancing productivity here as well. So even if we're seeing a potentially year-on-year decline in yield, that's not to say that that's indicative or reflective of a longer-term trend. We're still growing per acre productivity in the U.S. at a rate of about 0.4 of a bushel, per acre per yield. So that's exciting, even as we might be down a little bit this year. Naturally, a lot of the focus was on the U.S. balance sheet, and understandably so, given where we are this time in the year. Are there any other factors that really jumped out to you, either geographically or among some of the co-products on the balance sheets today?
Yeah, a couple of things. When we look at the size of the crop as it's estimated today, we're sitting at a situation where overall balance sheet numbers, when you look at total supplies year over year, as it stands today, very comparable. So we're in a situation where we're starting the marketing year roughly the same in terms of total supplies. But when we look at the big picture of demand, when we look at what continues to be the expansion in crush and the expansion in biofuels demand that we're expecting over the next couple of years, we're in a situation where clearly the demand focus on the U.S. balance sheet is going to be on the crush, and the export number is going to become, I don't want to use the word residual just because it's used in the balance sheet, but the export number itself is going to be that balancing factor to maintain ending stocks, what appears to be at near minimal levels. This 200 million bushel ending stocks estimate that we're looking at right now for the 2022-23 balance sheet largely is considered to be pipeline minimum in the U.S. So we're going to be doing the situation back and forth where we're having to maintain or manage the balance sheet by way of the export number, not necessarily the crush number, because we believe that crush demand is going to be there because of the ever rising biofuel demand. So when we're looking at how the balance sheet is going to shake out, we really need to focus on the hope or the need for a good South American crop this year, because we need to push bean exports to South America for 22-23, just the way that the balance sheet is shaking up right now. And that's why, with the Brazilian crop planting just getting underway, any kind of perceived risks to the South American crop this year likely are just going to be extremely important to potentially lead to extreme volatility in the soybean market moving forward.
That's a really interesting point when you think about the seasonality of soybean production, export, and overall availability on a global basis. I believe that a large reason why we've seen so much price volatility and elevated price level over much of this year goes back to the effective crop failure that happened in Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay last year. They were expecting crop over 200 million tons, and it came in about 30 million tons under that in aggregate. So the world and the markets were sending signals really looking for the U.S. to produce a lot of beans. And while where we stand today might not be a record, still 120 thereabout million metric tons is a substantial amount to put back into international markets and domestically as well. And I think you really underscored the importance of having this diversified management and portfolio approach towards our centers of demand. Certainly our export channels remain absolutely critical. Our buyers around the world remain absolutely critical, but so do those crush channels, so that we can continue to put more meal and more oil into the global marketplace. Centering on those two co-products for a moment, and I guess this is about stripping out signal from noise, because I did see a reduction in that meal export figure, and I saw a reduction in that soybean oil for biofuels use figure. Not large in magnitude, but do you think those are reflective of any trends, or is that just kind of balance sheet residual works?
Yeah, the old crop soybean oil for biodiesel number, as we continue to go through the marketing year and we get those official numbers for what's used, a slight downtick in the 21-22 soybean oil for biodiesel was justified. We do see continuing growth, quite frankly, pretty impressive growth, but the USDA has been so aggressive in their bean oil for biodiesel usage assessments earlier in the marketing year. Now we're well into the old crop marketing year. We're even with the delayed nature of EIA data coming out and this and that. We do know that their old crop bean oil for biodiesel numbers were a little bit on the a little bit too high, and they needed to be pulled back. The new crop number, I think that's more of a, hey, we lowered old crop, we're going to lower new crop. We had to reduce crush, we had to reduce bean oil production a little bit. And I think that might be more making the numbers work more than an actual reflection of what's likely to be seen in 22-23.
Well, it's called a balance sheet for a reason, right? You got to balance production, you got to balance distribution there. And and as I think through it a little bit more, especially hearing your remarks around where we are with domestic demand, particularly from biofuels, like we're starting to hear about some of the renewable diesel projects which are coming online, maybe getting slow walked a little bit as they're thinking through the economics of it, which I think is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. We're having a lot of crush expansion here in the US. And I think that the better that those downstream projects can kind of line up and be synchronized with the, crush expansion as well, it's going to balance it well while, ensuring we have an adequate pipeline for supplying domestic markets, but also making sure that we're continuing to be that very reliable supplier of choice that Mr. Sutter always talks about. And I think it's a really important point to keep bringing back forward, even as we have these evolving domestic dynamics. Now, I know we're focusing on soy here, but obviously the other big number was corn, and we saw reductions in yields there. So I guess I'm going to ask you, what jumped out to you on corn, but maybe try to reconcile it with where we are with soy and in terms of like just the overall demand figures around, for animal feed and everything, but how these two crops are kind of interplaying with each other for crop year 22.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. The corn numbers today, quite frankly, were more, in my opinion, fundamentally constructive for the corn balance sheet than we even saw in the soybeans. We're definitely far enough along in the cycle and the assessment of the corn yield situation that the reduction today to 172.5, that's a number that's probably going to stick, if not move lower from this point forward. We're in a situation in the corn balance sheet, unlike beans, where, like I said earlier, the total supply numbers year over year are fairly comparable for 22-23 versus 21-22. Corn in the US, we're going to be down about 1 billion bushels in total supply from a year ago. That's a hit. It's a huge hit. And now that we're far enough along in the corn situation that we're probably not going to see a bounce back higher in yields, knowing what we already know, we are in a clear demand rationing situation for corn. We're needing to take 600 or 700 million bushels out of demand in the new crop marketing year versus 21-22, just to keep U.S. ending stocks at minimum pipeline levels. So we have this really interesting dynamic going where we're clearly going to be having to reduce feed usage in the U.S. in 22-23 for corn, probably on the order of 400 or 500 million bushels. That feed replacement's not always an easy thing. You can try to shift a little bit here and there and this and that, but when we look at the overall dynamic between corn and beans, they're both extremely friendly all of a sudden for 22-23.
When you say feed replacement, it's not an easy thing. Obviously, I can't see the audience in the webcast right now, but I have to imagine we've got a number of customers around the globe just kind of nodding at that comment, because it is true. When you find the right ingredients that you want and that are delivering high performance, you tend to want to stick with that. And that's one of the attributes we really hang our hat on, representing U.S. soy, is putting that high quality product into the marketplace. But, I tell you about corn, and it's been a minute since I've been following corn markets a lot more closely than I do beans, but I can't remember the last time we had a production figure start with 13 billion and not 14 billion or 15 billion. So, when you have that changeover, to the order of 500 to 700 million bushels, that's a pretty substantial haircut to be taken.
It is, particularly in the context of the global situation with what's going on in the Black Sea region. You know, unlike soybeans, where obviously it's the U.S. and South America that's your main exporters, we're dealing with a very difficult situation with the lack of Ukrainian supplies, and that's a huge hit to the global marketplace. So when we're looking at forced demand reductions in corn in the U.S., on top of what we're already looking at with the issues with exporting corn out of the Black Sea region relative to the last few years, and the significant drought in the EU, which just is devastating their corn crop, the corn situation, quite frankly, is shaping up to be an extremely difficult one for this year.
You know, I think it bears mention, you know, the deals that have been brokered to enable grain export out of the Black Sea, you know, via Ukraine, you know, certainly positive, but it's nowhere near the volumes that would typically be going out on the corn and other grain side. So, you know, U.S. still delivering a large crop, just maybe not the same magnitude that we were hoping for due to those aforementioned weather pressures, for sure. Again, it goes back to say you can't take any crop for granted, but it's also, you know, I think reflective of, again, one of the things that we take a lot of pride in, which is being a reliable supplier to the world. You know, making sure that, you know, as we're producing it, we're getting it at export channels and ensuring that we can continue to deliver that food security. But you know, you've all heard enough, I think, from me and Randy for the moment. But please come back with more and more questions. But before then, we'd like to turn it back over to Jim so you can hear from the real stars and the real experts today, which are our farmers. Jim, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mac. And thank you, Randy. What interesting discussion. We could have gone on there a long time. That's very interesting. And we're lucky to have such experts talking to us this evening. Okay, well, that's a look at national and world numbers. So now let's talk with a few farmers for a local perspective. This is a critical time of year in the farming picture. So we are very lucky to have with us today 3 U.S. soy farmers. Now, I call them soy farmers, but they also grow other crops. And all of them also happen to be on our USEC board of directors. So they're very familiar with the activities of our organization. And we're very lucky to have them here because I'm sure they're all very busy on their farms with all kinds of the farm work at this time of year. So let's start with a quick overview from each of them on their operations. Or let me first introduce. We have, I think I mentioned before, but we have Stan Bourne from Illinois, Don Shire from South Dakota, and Brian Kemp from the state of Iowa. And we've got a limited amount of time. So I'm gonna ask them a few questions and ask them to give us just a brief overview of some things that are going on in their operation. So first, I'm gonna start with Stan. I'm gonna ask him to talk to us about what he planted this year. What was your crop mix? How's this compared to last year? What were your growing conditions like? And what are your expectations for harvest? And Stan, you know the drill. We don't have much time, but we'd love to hear about all those things. Back to you, or over to you, Stan. Thanks.
All right, Jim, the race is on. Well, hello, everyone. Good day. And thanks, Jim, for the intro. So as far as my farm, it's located in central Illinois, about 300 kilometers south of Chicago. I am fortunate to farm in some of the richest soils in the U.S. I have about a 55% corn mix and about 45% soy this year. Next year, it will just be the inverse because my agronomic strategy is to rotate corn and soybeans every other year. This year was interesting in that we had a late start, about a month behind, but by the time we got in the field, soil conditions were warm, crops popped out of the ground relatively quickly, got off to a good start, but then it turned quite dry. And that dryness continued through the month of June into July. But toward the end of July, it began raining. And we've been blessed with a lot of good moisture. And so I would just say the crop conditions, the soybeans and the corn both struggled a bit during June and early July. But the corn, I think, got hurt a little bit as far as its yield potential. Soybeans, however, while stressed, they still look pretty good. And we've continued to get rains through the month. And as far as starting harvest, I think we'll probably begin in about a week and a half. Yield comparison, just a quick note on that. I think corn will probably be off my 5-year average, maybe by 5%, maybe even 10%. Soybeans, I believe, will be above my 5-year average. My 5-year average on soybeans, 62 bushels per acre. I think we've got a chance of being in the 70 plus range this year. Over.
Well, great. Thank you, Stan. You packed a lot of information into that brief time period. Thank you so much. All right, now we are going to travel up to the state of South Dakota, about what, an hour and 45-minute flight or so, probably northwest of where Stan is. And we'll turn it over to Dawn Shire. Dawn, please give us
Hi.
the same rundown on your operation. Thank you.
Well, Shire Farms is located in the northwest growing region of soybeans in the US. We raise corn and soybeans on our farm. We pretty much do a 50-50 rotation. This year, 2022, has been a roller coaster year for us. When we started planting, we did not have any subsoil moisture. We were able to plant fence row to fence row. There's a saying out here that plant in dry dirt, the bends will bust. Well, while we were planting, we got hit with a derecho, and a derecho that we got hit was with 100 miles an hour to 120 miles an hour. It happened right at a critical time for the beans. So we had to do a replant. We did over 500 acres of replanting. With that, we had to clean up our fields and get everything cleaned up. Once things got rolling and we were done, we had really good rainfall. We were really happy. We were able to get really good weed control. The beans were putting on a lot of pods. We were getting really positive, thinking we were going to have some really good yields. And then in August, it stopped raining and we watched our crop run out of moisture. The beans up top, well, the pods, upper pods, they aborted, and the lower beans, some of them only have 2 beans per pod. So we're really questioning what the yield is going to be. It's hard to guess what the replant acres are going to be. We had a gentleman north of us start planting beans. He has a different number of beans, and they averaged 42 bushels per acre. We are thinking our beans are going to be about 40 bushels per acre. In the state, it's kind of looking at the farther north you go, the beans are looking better. Farther south, it's drier. So it's a really big estimate. It's really hard to guess your yields with the replant, what it's going to be, but it's going to be below our normal average.
Well, thank you very much, Don. I know that derecho was a real problem for you guys, and I'm glad no one was in your family was hurt in that event, but I know it caused an awful lot of damage to your farm buildings and all your bins blowing over and that sort of thing. So that's a shame, but thanks for that report. Brian, now we're going to go down to the state of Iowa, and if you could give us an update on your situation for this year.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that, Jim. My wife Cindy and I have a soybean corn operation in the northwest corner of Iowa. I plant a 50-50 crop rotation every year. And this year I got off to kind of a slow start. We had some wet weather to deal with in planting soybeans. Started planting in 10 days to 2 weeks later than what I would like. My fields were on the edge of the drought that hit northwest Iowa for most of the summer. Our summer rains were spotty. Actually, my best beans are in a field that I farm 20 miles from my headquarters. And just by virtue of the fact that they got more rain throughout the growing season that over in that field than the rest of my fields. So yields in my neighborhood will be variable, kind of depending upon rainfall. And they will also be variable, I anticipate, even within the field, just because of soil type. The lighter soils that that don't retain moisture quite so well, the yields will be down in those areas. We've had about 70% of a normal rainfall throughout the summer. We say that yields are made in August. Well, thankfully, we got about a 3-inch rain the first week of August. So that is kind of carrying us through harvest. As far as my yields that I anticipate, I anticipate hitting my 5-year average, or maybe 5% less than my 5% or 5-year average. So I'll probably be in a 55 to 60 bushel whole farm range. Normally, my yields are higher than what I anticipate, so I hope that's the case this year. Never really know what the beans are going to yield till you get out with the combine and start harvesting them. So we've had a few rains since the good one in August, and hopefully that is still helping add to yield.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So it sounds like a real mix across the 3 farms that we have represented, or 3 areas we have represented. Let's move on and talk about a slightly different topic. Let's talk about risk management, because just as everybody who's participating in this event today, they're managing risk in one way or another. You're managing your risk on your farm. Could you just tell us briefly about how do you do that? Stan, over to you.
Yeah, risk management. I've actually thought about investing money in emotional support to keep my attitude positive because of some of the challenges that we've had. But actually, the thing that I really put my emphasis on this year was on crop protectant strategies. So protecting the crop that I expect to have. After we started getting the good rains, we were fortunate to be able to have a very good weed control and pest control, and then investing 100% in fungicide protection on the crop to protect the yield potential that's there. So that was the number one thing I did. The second thing was just some of my marketing strategies to have a little forward selling to make sure that I had my expenses covered. I was in a zone where it was profitable. So I took those sales to make those profits and ensure that I could sleep well at night.
Well, that's one thing we want our farmers to do, is be able to sleep well at night. Very good, Stan. Okay, Don, over to you on that one. Risk management strategies.
Agriculture has a lot of risk in it. For us, we decide what we're going to plant ahead of time. We do a lot of prepay. Well, this year we were lucky and did a lot of prepay. We got our field prices locked in because we planted in dry dirt. We upped our crop insurance and marketing ahead of time. We got about 45% of our soybeans marketed ahead of time.
Excellent. And you do the same with your corn crop as well, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, you do the options and everything.
Yeah.
This year it's kind of been a little different with everything, but with the corn and beans, we do it for both of them.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, and Brian, over to you.
Yes, Jim. Well, in addition to the crop management protection against risk, I depend heavily upon crop insurance in my operation. I use a revenue product, a guaranteed revenue product, and my biggest risk as far as insurance, I'm in a kind of a hail belt where I farm. So hail is probably my biggest crop risk. So I depend upon hail insurance also in my risk management.
Well, not good to be in a hail belt.
It is not.
But I guess there's not much you can do about that. Okay, let's move on to another question. And I think I was going to ask a couple more, but I'm going to try and combine these together because we're running a bit short on time. So, and you've touched a little bit on this, but how do you market your crop? Where does your crop go once you take it out of the field? I think people would be interested in knowing about that. And secondly, if you could kind of combine into that answer, is there something you want customers who are listening, customers around the world that are listening, to know about either your farm or the crop that you're raising for their consumption? So I'll start with you again, Stan. Thanks.
Yeah, great, thanks. So as far as the crop, where it goes, I actually haul just a few miles from my farm to a local elevator. It's a cooperative, and that cooperative sells most of its products to Archer Daniels Midland, located in Decatur, Illinois, which is about 30 miles away. Most of those soybean products get turned into soybean isolates and concentrates, but there are some that get exported. Those typically will make their way to the Illinois River, down the Mississippi, and out to the port of New Orleans, to all ports of call. And as far as something that I'd like for all of you to remember, it's already been touched on a couple times here, but I just like to reemphasize the nutrient quality of U.S. soy. We've got a good product. It's those of you that are in the animal industry, we've got a great balance of digestible amino acids and energy levels. It's a good product. We can deliver it reliably, and we produce it in a sustainable manner. What's not to like about U.S. soy? Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Stan. And Don, let's go over to you. And I know maybe your situation's changed a little bit this year versus how you would normally deal with your crop as you take it out of the field.
In the Dakotas, you know, you got to fight weather. So we try and get everything out as fast as we can. And we had everything went into on-farm storage, corn and beans. We did not take the time to go to the elevator. That's where usually after harvest, we'll bring our crop to the elevator. As of right now, we do not have any working bins. So we are going to have to go to the elevator for all our beans, and that's a little different for us. So will be challenging for the trucking side of it. Our beans, we go to about 3 different locations for our beans, and a lot of it goes to export. And with that, that usually goes out through the PMW. What I'd like our customers to know, we really care. We really work on doing a sustainable crop. A lot of things on our farm are done because of sustainability. We do care about the quality of our beans. We always make sure we send samples in so you guys will know the good quality of beans that we're going to produce. And we do have beans here to sell, so we're looking forward to some sales. Great.
Thank you, Don. And Brian, finish us off with your comments in that area.
Okay, Jim, all my soybeans are stored off farm. I have on-farm storage for my corn crop. My soybean crop goes to a cooperative in town. I do pre-market a portion of that crop sometime during the growing season. Being careful not to market more than I think I'm going to produce. I've had the opportunity to travel between Northwest Iowa and Central Iowa a couple times in the last week. And I just like our viewers to know that I was able to see acre after acre, thousands of acres of soybeans just starting to mature. Impressed with the weed-free fields that I was witness to. And I think the whole countryside is you see combines out on the yard preparing to go to the field. My fellow producers and I just look forward to getting out there and harvesting a good crop that we've got and provide them for our foreign customers that we have on the conference tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. And thanks to all of our panelists, Stan, Don, Brian. You know, that wraps up our farmer panel. We could have gone on a long time. I know people would have had more questions for you, but we're limited time-wise. But thank you so much for being with us here this evening. I'm sure the audience appreciated your insights. And I'm going to turn it back now over to Mac and Randy to take some of the questions from the audience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to our esteemed panel, Don, Stan, Brian. That was excellent. I think just getting that firsthand perspective of what you guys are living in your day-to-day operations and everything that you manage, not just over this season, but really any season, is just incredible insight for anybody. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Brian, tomorrow I've got to do a 5.5-hour drive up to central Iowa, and I wasn't looking forward to it, but after you were talking about the combines and the fields and everything, okay, now I'm actually looking forward to the sights of that drive. But and that's one of the interesting things about the US, right? We can drive around a lot, see a lot of the countryside, see a lot of the diversity of production. And I think there's one thing that I take away from this panel of farmers that we've had on is that, every geography has its own challenges and advantages. And I think it's the geographic diversity as well as the diversity of farming operations in this country that helps us have an overall resilient system. If you have a drought in one part of the country, you're able to offset it elsewhere. And that's part of what enables our overall productivity here. So, even with the reductions that we talked about earlier in the program, still set up for an overall good crop this year. But Randy, let's turn our eyes down south. So, I think over the weekend, planting in Brazil started. They reached their planting dates where they can initiate soybean planting because it ostensibly doesn't introduce disease pressures like soybean rust. You gotta manage that. What are you guys at RJ O'Brien seeing for potential South American production this year, knowing that the last 2 years had La Nina impacting it, particularly last year with the aforementioned drop in production? We're already seeing figures about about Brazil bringing even more area into production and, potential crop size approaching 150 million tons. What are you guys seeing from a risk management standpoint?
Yeah, current ideas are that there's going to be could be or is expected to be a fairly decent increase in Brazilian soybean area in particular. It does look like Argentina is going to try to increase area as well. We've seen numbers out of Brazil anywhere 5 to 6% increase in soybean area year over year for the coming crop. Similar numbers, maybe not quite as strong in Argentina, but generally speaking, we are looking at a pretty decent increase in area for both, again, weather permitting. And there you hit the nail on the head. We're looking very likely like we're going to have a very unusual three-peat of La Nina conditions, and this is going to make for a potentially very interesting situation. We just went through the disappointing Brazilian crop amid La Nina conditions. The relationship between La Nina and South American weather, decent, but not the best. We can have La Nina, we can have very good years and yields in years of La Nina. So it's not necessarily a death sentence for the crop. But, we are seeing continued dryness in parts of Argentina that they're struggling with the wheat crop. We are looking at continued dryness in bean areas as well in Argentina. Early stuff in Brazil looks pretty good for now, but yeah, early ideas, if you go trend line type yields and a 5 to 6% increase in Brazil, yeah, you've got the potential to have a really large 148 to 150 million ton crop this year. The potential is clearly there. Now it's just a matter of getting the crop in the weather.
Now, I don't want to get speculative or put words in your mouth or anything, but if I'm putting all that together and reconciling that with, where we are in terms of global supplies, we of course saw a downward revision of 2.5 million tons in the projected global carryout. We've been in one heck of a weather market this year. We were in a heck of a weather market last year. And it seems like, given where we are with global inventory levels and, this potential three-peat for La Nina, it seems like we could be entering into a period of even more volatility, just as the market's assessing what's been unfolding in South America. Is that a correct read of the situation?
100%. We have another 2 months of USDA monthly crop revisions forthcoming as they revise the crop again in October and November, take December off, and then you're stuck waiting for the January annual report. But we do have a 60-day window here where we have two very, very critical USDA reassessments of the US crop. At the same time, we're going into the planting season in South America. So if these numbers that we saw today on the US side confirm, and we are looking at a 50 bushel an acre type yield in the US, any kind of a weather threat, any kind of dryness concerns in South America really has the potential to even further increase market volatility and really get this, I don't want to say more heated, but more heated. I mean, this is a very, very critical 60 to 90-day window that we're entering here.
So, I mean, I think given that volatility and, where we are, approaching harvest, we heard, from some of our farmers, we're going to be starting field work soon. And we said it before, you can't count a harvest until it's actually in the bin. I think it really underscores the sanctity of securing supply. I think more than in non-volatile environments. But I do want to go back to something you're saying when talking about the data releases coming up and really what to look for. And just to validate, this change that we saw to the acreage figure in September, this is not the norm, correct? Typically, we see that update in October if we see any sort of revision on the area side. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. USDA, it's standard protocol is for them to revise or take a relook at planted acreage numbers in the October for the October report once they have what they feel is sufficient FSA program data. Again, they felt, given the data that they had already, that they could do that a month earlier, for today's report. And again, they will revisit that again for the January annual. So we do have the potential for that to be revised again at that point. Pretty unlikely at this point that we'll see further notable revisions in October or November.
So in an odd way, we almost got a little bit more intelligence about the market a little earlier on because of data from FSA or the Farm Service Agency rolling in, with some degree of critical mass.
Exactly.
So, back to South America for a second. Brazil and Argentina, both countries have been experiencing a lot of currency weakness. Argentina in particular, really trying to incentivize additional soy sales now, as farmers have been holding back as a hedge against further devaluation of the Argentine currency, and the same holds in Brazil as well. We're talking about, large crops due to more acreage coming in, but in the US, we probably import maybe 10% of our fertilizer. Brazil, Argentina is a very different game. And obviously, fertilizer prices have been high. They were high last year, but now we've got availability issues, Black Sea sourcing and everything. Does that present any potential concerns for productivity out of South America?
Yeah, 100%. It's something that's clearly on the radar. That's always a real tough mix between what kind of productivity loss are you going to get if you get near ideal weather. When you have that combination of difficult weather or less than ideal weather conditions on top of a lack of fertilizer application, it can really be that double whammy for the crop, and that's what we're going to be watching for. We are looking at putting specifics on it is very difficult, obviously, but yeah, when you look at the reduction in fertilizer supplies out of Russia because of the sanctions and the difficulties that they've had with shipping, most in Brazil are saying that applications will be down year over year, but it's not a critical or crisis type situation. But just given the high cost, given the at least modest reduction in availability, there will be a reduction in fertilizer application, and it's a concern. If we get great weather, if we get great rains on a regular basis, it offsets that clearly. But it's just another thing that could add to the yield concerns if we do see dryness develop.
It got me thinking back to some of the comments from Brian, Stan, and Dawn on the panel. And it was a question for me last year when in the U.S., we were seeing these fertilizer prices, and corn obviously uses a lot more fertilizer than soybeans, but you package the crops together into a nitrogen management cycle so that you're able to restore the ecological balance there. And I'm always taken by that because farmers are all running businesses. They've got to think about economic returns, but that's not the sole factor with which you're looking at it. You have to invest and make the sound agronomic decisions. And most of the farmers I talked to last year were saying, hey, we're going to stick to as best a 50-50 rotation we can, even given that the outsized fertilizer costs. So I think maintaining that integrity of the land and everything is something that helps enable us to continue to grow productivity and efficiency and be resilient in those times when Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. Randy. Really, really appreciate you joining us on the program this evening. Great discussion as always. I appreciate your insights both in the domestic and in the international markets. I think we're all collectively walking away from here with a better understanding of where we are today and potentially where we could be over the next coming months. Because as you said, it's going to be one heck of a ride.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mac. And once again, I appreciate the invite and always love participating.
Thanks again. Back to you, Jim.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Mac. And thanks to all of our experts for being with us this evening. I'm sure everybody appreciated hearing your insights. Appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise with them. As we enter the harvest season, and now we've transitioned to the 22-23 crop marketing year, let me share just a few takeaways from recent events and from today's report. First off, I think obviously just when we think we have a pretty good handle on what things may be, or when you think the future you can kind of predict it, we'll still get surprises. I think as the report surprised many people, as we heard about earlier. The global leadership and management firm Korn Ferry reports that shifts today are happening in industry are arguably the most significant since the Industrial Revolution. And these are coming in many forms. They're saying in order to overcome these, that businesses and their leaders need to anticipate what lies ahead. And sometimes it's simply storm clouds, that turbulence, and it'll just go away. But sometimes it's more structural change, and you need to be able to figure out the difference between those things. And knowing how to do that and figuring out how to do that is really critical. Navigating, being able to navigate or course correct, another way to say that. And you may have a strategy, and we organized our strategy a year ago, but we need to continue to update that strategy and continue to make course corrections as we go along. And I'm sure all of you are doing that in your businesses, especially at these times that are so volatile and full of all kinds of things. So together, the ability to anticipate and navigate will keep organizations forward facing. And hopefully the information and the insight we shared here today will allow you to look at your strategy and reinforce your existing plans or update and modify those plans as appropriate. We've talked about the ability to anticipate a negative, and your investors, your employees, your customers, they're all counting on you to do that, just as you count on US soy to do that. There's a global call for companies to mitigate the climate crisis and enable food and nutrition security. And US soy is at the table and partnering with organizations and companies around the world to help them achieve those goals. US soy is delivering solutions and wants to continue delivering solutions. So please ask us how we can work with your organization if you have questions or things that you need. So finally, thank you for your time today. If you have more questions, please contact a USEC team member, and they can help you or get you in touch with the right person. That's what we're here for. We want to be here to answer your questions and help you feel smarter about all things related to soy. And finally, stay safe, have a good day, and thanks for your ongoing partnership with the US soy industry. Thank you very much. Have a good day.